everyone. Welcome back. And as I mentioned before our break, Lori Peltier will be joining us for this segment to talk about FERPA. Welcome, Lori.
Hi, Sally. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
All right, so I think we need to start with what FERPA is. I don't know if you wanted to do a different introduction first, but not everybody knows what that acronym stands for.
Exactly. So FERPA stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It's a government rule that a student at the age of 18 or entering college, so even if your child is 17 but going off to college, has to fill out this FERPA form. It's a release form giving access to the parent of their academic and financial records. Without this form being signed, the parent cannot see the student's financial aid, their student loan information, their student account information for how much the tuition is and what they owe on their bill, or any of their academic grades. It also allows access to make amendments to the information if you ever wanted to contest a grade or contest information. So the FERPA form is really important for parents, but the student needs to release it to the parent. So I was recently talking to a friend of mine whose son is going off to a large public university in the fall, and she knew that the FERPA form had to be filled out because it was on his to-do list, the checklist that the school gave him, and they did fill it all out, but the parent still wasn't getting emails from the school. The FERPA form does not change how the school communicates with the student. They will still be communicating with the student as the primary customer. Crazy as it is, the bill goes to the student. Obviously, the grades go to the student. The financial aid offer goes to the student. So the parent still doesn't see everything, but they have access to call and request information or get into the system and see information online. But the communication is still going to the student.
Okay. All right. And now now that families have made a decision on a school, what are some, I mean, you mentioned some types of communication, but what are some of the other types that they should be expecting? What should they be
Mhm.
looking out for?
Yeah, I think of this time period as like the ninth inning, or the end of the marathon, if you will, because people think, oh, I finally got through, I made a decision, I paid a deposit, we're ready to go. But there's a lot of little things that still need to be tied up and need to happen for a smooth transition off to college. So students, when they pay a deposit, will receive access typically to an online portal just for new students. And on there will be a checklist with things like emergency contact information, release forms for your picture or your information. If the newspaper wants to run a picture of you playing soccer at your college, you need to release all that information. Roommate selection, which orientation do you want to go to? So there's a lot of little things that happen in June, July, and August in order to get the student all signed up and ready to go. I often tell families, remember way back when you sent your kid off to kindergarten and all that paperwork you had to fill out to get them into public school or whatever
Mhm.
school they went to, you're doing it all over again. But now it's the student is being asked for the information, but most students will need mom and dad's help to fill it out.
Okay. So is the FERPA like a one-time thing to authorize, or is that something that families need to do every year?
The student will be asked every year if there are any changes. If the student changes their mind and wants to add someone or remove someone from their FERPA, they can do that at any time. But every year, the student will be asked, do you want to keep it the same? And obviously, if the student changes schools, they would have to do it again at their new school. One thing I remind families to think about is, if you're in a divorced or separated situation, you might have mom and dad living at different places. You definitely want to think about who's going to have access to your information and add them or not add them.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that all being very stressful with divorced parents, which I had. So, although I just ended up being my mom, she just was the one who made sure everything happened. I don't know what
Right,
would have happened without her, honestly.
right.
All right. So, do colleges do a good job communicating this information to families in general?
I think it depends on the school, but I do think they are getting better at it, and now that everything is online, when my first child went off to college, it was 2010, and I found it a little bit like unnerving. I didn't think it was organized, but I think now that everything is online and people are so used to doing all these forms online, as I mentioned, they will have access to this portal with a checklist. If things are missing, the student will receive an email, typically at their school issued email account, which is another thing. You know, the student might have 2 or 3 different email accounts. One of them is their new email with the college that they've deposited at. So that's where the information is going to be sent.
Hmm.
So I do think that they do a good job. I think with COVID-19 and all the different correspondence or communication the colleges are trying to get out to the students, some things might get lost because there's just so much communication going on and nothing's really definite, so you don't know what to pay attention to. Um, but yeah, I think a family should probably plan on sitting down with their student and going through that online checklist in the student portal together.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm just, this brings up a memory of a friend of mine back in college. This was pre-email when our mailboxes were everything. And he missed a financial aid deadline and
Mhm.
finally like realized that he had missed a deadline, checked his box after like a month, and he walks
Yep.
into the financial aid office and apparently the director of financial aid said, "You don't check your box, do you?" He's like, "If you're on financial aid, you have to check your box." And I mean, really, he needed to be checking it for everything. But he was like, "Yes, sir." He actually quite liked the director of financial aid. But email is the new box,
Mhm.
kids. And I mention
Yep.
that because students, they're on text, they're on Snapchat, they're on whatever. I sometimes find some of them don't check their email. You have to check your email.
Yes.
It's the new box, is what I would say. So,
True.
all right. So turning 18 and heading off to college is already a pretty big milestone. So, what else is changing at this time?
Well, those parents that are listening who already have an 18-year-old would know this, but at 18, the student becomes or the child becomes an adult in the eye of the law. So medical records is another big one. So for those who have already turned 18, you may have had to fill out healthcare proxy forms with your pediatrician. But if you haven't and your child's headed off to college, you need to sign yourself. Typically, the parent is going to be the healthcare proxy. No one wants to think about something bad happening, but if the student injures themselves or is in an accident of some kind, mom and dad won't have any say in their medical care if they have not been designated as the healthcare proxy. And
Mhm.
it's stricter in some states than others. So something to think about, especially depending on how far away from home the child is going and things like that. Some people even recommend getting a lawyer involved and getting some legal documents so that, God forbid, if something does happen, the parents can make decisions for the student if they're incapable to make them themselves.
Right, right. Yeah, the laws are pretty strict as far as what can
Mhm.
be disclosed. So,
Correct.
I mean, I've heard of cases where when the forms weren't signed, the kid was very ill in the hospital and people weren't allowed to tell the parents, I think. So,
Yeah.
if the roommate didn't know the parent's number and didn't think to
Yeah.
call, the school was legally not allowed to do so. So,
Right.
yeah, it can be very tough. So, all right. Anything else that parents should be looking out for at this critical time?
Well, I think, a lot of people think about going off to college. Well, I have to teach my child how to do their own laundry, or, you know, hopefully they have good study habits. But there's a lot of other things that might not think about, such as financially, will the student need a budget? And have you talked about budgeting their money? And how will their earnings last all through the fall semester? What if they need to eat off campus or buy their books? How are they going to do that? Do they need a credit card? Do they need an ATM card on campus? What if they're going to work? Who helps them fill out those work forms? The way that you fill out the forms for employment can change how you're taxed on your earnings. So it can be a surprise at the end of the year. Oh, I didn't have any taxes taken out of my earnings, and now I might owe some taxes. And I think the other big one is insurance, health insurance for the student. The school will bill you for health insurance if you don't prove that you have the student covered under your own health insurance.
Mhm.
That is one thing that gets missed by some families. So, having that discussion, do you need dorm insurance or apartment insurance for your belongings in your dorm? And then tuition insurance is a new one, especially with COVID-19. A lot of families are thinking, well, what if my child gets sick with COVID, or the school decides to send them home early and we want to drop out or not continue the semester, what kind of a refund policy does the school have? And would tuition insurance be helpful to get my money back if I've paid for the whole semester?
Mm,
So that's another big topic lately.
yeah, yeah. All right. So not all students live on campus, and with COVID-19, many will still be living at home. Are there any different suggestions in that situation?
I think, and you may have been seeing this with your students that you work with, but these seniors, maybe from March on have been taking online classes. And in the fall, they're going to be taking online classes. But I think you have to recognize or acknowledge the milestone that has passed. They're not in high school anymore. They are
Mm-hmm.
now a college student. So as a family, how do you accommodate that? I was going to say, extending a curfew or, giving them more freedom and rights as as a child in your household. So you just want to make sure that you're acknowledging that it's different and it's not high school anymore, that this is college, this is real. And then you might have to have expenses for uh, higher internet speed, or a designated workspace for the student and a new laptop, things like that. So even though you're not going to have expenses for the dorm room or the meal plan, but you might have other expenses from the student being at home, maybe car insurance and gas mileage and car repairs if they're going to commute to campus, or even just being home instead of being away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So things could be changing, and then they might shift again for January because
Right.
they might go back to campus. So,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I think given that there might only be a month between fall and spring semesters, and the college, who knows what's going to happen, but the colleges will be shifting maybe from online to on campus. So then in December, you all of a sudden have to get ready to move into campus in January.
Mm-hmm.
So what students typically have the whole summer to prepare for, they're now just going to have the month of December.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And just so everybody listening to this knows, Lori is a mom. She has sent kids to college, so she knows what she's talking about from both perspectives. So,
Yes. Yeah.
all right. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Sally. It was great to be here.
All right. So we're going to take a short break, but when we get back, I'll be welcoming Joy Biscornet to tell us her college story.